At least it's not getting any handouts and bailouts and any state subsidies. The airports company South Africa says it grew annual profits by more than 20% last year, from 1.6 billion to nearly 2 billion rand. But the company's empowerment partners are not very happy. They are taking ACSA to court because they claim the parastatal is holding them hostage, economically hostage to be precise. This is The Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight I'm joined by Pieter Smit, who's an attorney. He represents both African Harvest Strategic Investments and Upfront Investments in a court case. He is from Fulcon and Hume attorneys, and Alun, who's African Harvest's corporate advisor. They join me to discuss why it is taking so long to get an exit from their investment. Now at the JSE you can get T+3. It's been T+3 years for the investors in the airports company South Africa trying to get out. Department of Transport has not yet fulfilled its promise to privatise or list the airports companies on the stock exchange, as was the plan
1998.
Yeah, 15 years ago. I mean, that's 18 years ago. That's when there were a bunch of minority shareholders. There were the empowerment shareholders and Aeroporti di Roma, the airports company that ran the Rome airport and had the stakes all over the world, had I think a 20% stake in airports company South Africa.
That's correct, Bruce. Yes, in 1998 the government decided to fully privatise ACSA with a staged privatisation with a strategic equity partner being Aeroporti di Roma with 20%. It offered minority shareholders in a prospectus the opportunity to buy up to 10%. 4% took up the offer. That prospectus promised a fully privatised company, commercially run company, a listing of the company, and an effective regulatory environment. And unfortunately, none of that has happened. And that's primarily the oppression that the minorities are claiming, as well as the fact that the state has diverted the commercial aspect of ACSA towards a developmental one, with, for instance, the 17 billion capex program before the 2010 Soccer World Cup, which included probably 10 billion for King Shaka Airport, which we think wasn't necessary, and that fundamentally changed the way the regulator regulates ACSA. The regulators like NERSA for Eskom, it regulates the airport tariffs.
At one stage there was a guy called Mohammed somebody or other. It was a one-man regulatory band, and that was at the time that we were seeing the huge increases in airport taxes in the run-up to the build of King Shaka, and it was pretty much ACSA was a law unto itself. The chief executive at the time, Montlahla, had been given a mandate, and the mandate was make them big, make them flashy, make them pretty. South Africa's on show for the World Cup 2010. That was the motivation, right?
Well, I wasn't around at that stage, Bruce, and I'm not.
What do your history books tell you? I mean,
what the history books do show us is that in 2010, the ACSA annual report showed King Shaka's reportable assets were 9 to 10 billion. The ACSA board in 2007 approved a capex spend of 5.5 billion, and that was then morphed probably into 10 billion. The recent ACSA annual financial statement showed reportable assets of 7.1 billion for King Shaka, over 4.1 billion last year. So it's difficult to track exactly what's happening, but what we do know is that the Presidential Review Committee on State-Owned Enterprises in 2012-2013 did a case study on King Shaka, and its overall finding was that the commercial viability of ACSA was compromised in the national interest.
Well, I could have told them that in 2007 when the plans were being laid for this thing. But when it comes down to a legal claim, I mean, you go into an investment, you pays your money and you takes your chances, Pieter. Are you holding the airports company to account based on the prospectus of 1998?
Bruce, to some extent, that's correct, but it goes wider than that. If you look at the description of what minority oppression is in terms of the company.
Minority oppression.
That's correct.
Okay, that's very. Is that not a bit melodramatic in this particular
Well, that's the terminology that one finds in the legislation and the case law.
And minority oppression covers the fact that as a shareholder you don't have the rights that a shareholder might have in a listed company. You are simply subject to the whims of whatever the board or the government of the day says in a state-owned enterprise like the airports company.
Yes, essentially in a nutshell it's about conduct which is unfairly prejudicial to minority shareholders. And it could be conduct on the part of the majority shareholders or on the part of the company. And one tests that in the context of both the understandings that have existed between the shareholders, the promises made in the prospectus, and the general expectation of a shareholder that the company will at least be run in a commercially justifiable manner.
Now, here's the airports company in South Africa. Anybody who travels through airports on a regular basis will see a remarkable structure. It's nicely run. There's lots of airplanes landing. There are lots of restaurants and shops which charge big lots of rental. It looks like a really high functioning business. Some of the most expensive retail space in South Africa per square meter will be found at OR Tambo International Airport. People are gagging to advertise on the billboards. This is not a shoddily run company, or is it?
Well, Bruce, I think Alun can probably speak a little bit more to the commercial realities within ACSA, but
well, let Alun do that then. I mean, he has a business which is generating great cash. However, it's sitting with a debt burden of, at last check, 13 or 14 billion rand.
It's down to about 10 billion.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is on
So
the
it's servicing its debt.
It is on the face of it a fairly well-run monopoly. However, for minority shareholders who in 1998 bought in on the strength of the prospectus with an exit, and those minority shareholders were at that stage empowerment shareholders.
What is stopping you from selling?
The Minister of Transport has to sign off on any share trade in ACSA, and there are not many buyers. The business has been diverted, as I said, towards a developmentally run asset with a dysfunctional regulator. Now that regulator is not regulating tariffs in an effective and consistent and transparent manner. ACSA is forecasting those tariffs, which is 60% of its gross revenue, to reduce by 30% next year.
Well, simply because they are amongst the highest tariffs in the world. As a shareholder, you might appreciate this.
Not really that. They've got a complicated formula that they work out how to do it. I mean, simplistic, it's like that. And the system and the regulator actually dictates to ACSA how much money of its capital expenditure plan it will allocate towards recouping through tariffs. And that process all started in 2006 when ACSA embarked on this ambitious expansion program of 17 billion rand. And that also thwarted any commercially run listable business, because you couldn't possibly list ACSA the way it's run at the moment with the regulator as it is, and a thing like King Shaka Airport not making a profit and being subsidized by effectively the other airports, and at the end of the day the shareholders.
The wonderful thing about King Shaka International Airport, every time I've been there's never been a queue. You don't have to queue for the shops, you don't have to queue for coffee, and security is always a breeze. But that's the problem. It is massively underutilized. In terms of the utilization of airports, OR Tambo always seems clogged. Cape Town International regularly seems clogged. OR Tambo, King Shaka not so much.
King Shaka runs at about 33% of capacity in this recent
That number
year.
surprises me, because in my experience, which is not vast, it seldom seems that busy.
The other airports are not that big, not that much bigger. I mean, gross, if you look at ACSA's recent annual report of 54.5 million passengers per annum volume over all their airports, they're currently using around about 20 million passenger volume, or seeing 20 million passenger volume. So that's not huge, but ACSA Johannesburg OR Tambo Airport makes close to 4 billion rand profit, and King Shaka breaks even before interest cost.
So but the interest cost has got to be quite significant on something like King Shaka.
King Shaka costs, let's say it costs 9 or 10 billion. Take simple interest at 10%.
You're paying 10%, that's a billion rand a year in interest.
It's a billion rand, so you're making no money in King Shaka Airport, and the other airports are subsidizing it.
Now, okay, so you haven't yet answered the question as to why not just sell. You've got a 4%, say you're 5% between you, 5 or 6% between you as minority shareholders in the two entities that you're representing. Why not just say, give us a price and you can have your blooming shares back, Department of Transport?
Well, I think if you... there aren't that many buyers for a state asset that's...
Department of Transport could buy you out. I mean,
is
that what you're aiming for?
We approached the Department of Transport in the beginning of 2012 on behalf of all the minorities, and said, we know you don't have any money, you've got to go to National Treasury to ask for the money, and that won't happen. Give your blessing, because your permission's required, and we'll go to ACSA and do a share buyback, and we offered to sell the shares at net asset value. We thought that was reasonable. It took 3 years to bounce around between the Department of Transport and ACSA, and eventually after close to 3 years the board of ACSA came to us and said our shares, just some metrics, the minorities paid 8.20 Rand in 1998 a share. In 2005, the PRC bought out the Romans for £16.75 a share.
That's not bad.
That wasn't bad.
Decent return, yeah.
March 2014, the ACSA board told us they'd valued our shares at £10.36 a share.
Okay.
August 2014, the board offered us, as the minorities, £12.87 a share. Now, the metrics they use to calculate that share value is their forecasts. And they do a discounted cash flow valuation, and they come up with that value.
What would you sell your shares for?
We see that the value of ACSA is nothing less than net asset value, and in excess of that. The current net asset value of ACSA in the recent audited results is 34 Rand a share.
Okay.
36 Rand a share probably at the end of this month. When the minorities bought in, they paid the same price as the Romans, and that was an 18 PE historic multiple, or 3 times net asset value. So if you add those numbers onto 34, 36 Rand, you're up above 100 Rand.
But you will take 36?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
We said 3 years ago,
okay,
we'll do a quick deal at NAV. Now that we've had to go through this process, we actually want fair value, which we think is far in excess of 36 Rand a share.
So you think closer to $100 a share? Pieter, well, how do you extract the money without going through the enormous expense of getting tied up in the courts? Because already the dividend flows haven't been what they were at the times of the Romans. We talk about the Romans, by the way. We're talking about Aeroporti di Roma, not Julius Caesar and his mates. How do you get the money out without incurring excessive cost? Because my guess is that's what the mighty ACSA is banking on, that you will blink before they buckle.
Well, Bruce, it's a question of trying to make them see reason through the court process. So, I mean, the minorities remain open to discussing a settlement.
But where are you in the legal process? I must push you now.
Sure, we've filed all the affidavits.
Right.
The next step in the process is to enrol the matter for hearing, and we expecting the matter to be heard, if not at the end of this year, then during the first quarter next year.
And with delays and kicking the can down the road, at best you're in 2018 before you actually get a court date.
Well, not necessarily. There's very little by way of procedural delays that can still occur.
Okay. Could you get an outcome in 2017, or you prepare to settle beforehand?
Sure.
Well, we've in terms of
I'm watching the eye line. The eye line is interesting.
In terms of settlement, I mean, we've always been open
Yeah.
for a meaningful and fair offer, and we've always said we would look at a fair offer, but we haven't been given a fair offer. And half of net asset value, when the board of ACSA shows net asset value in its audit financial statements, worked out exactly the same way they claim to work out our share price. Those two don't gel,
Okay.
and they can't have it both ways.
We will leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Pieter Smit, who's an attorney at Fulcon and Hume Attorneys. Alun Frost, who is the African Harvest Corporate Advisor. There'll be other issues on minority shareholder revolts. We'll try and get the Airports Company South Africa on. They're usually pretty good about eventually coming back to you on matters of import, but this is a court case. It's going to court unless there is a settlement fairly soon. And ultimately, who will pay it? Oh yes, the travelling public will pay the bill. Rather settle this sooner rather than later. Thanks very much for watching The Moneymakers. Till later. Bye-bye.